I think we've covered the basics of the fundamental basics in a couple of the previous dialogues. Never hurts to go back and review and always be focusing on those basic points, because I do find that at the end of the day that all there really is the basic points. And so really a lot of this is simply a reminder and a refocusing, walking back through the fundamental points. So that can never hurt, that can never be wasted, because one of the things that I find, for example, in the comments that come up sometimes when people are writing in, is that often you get a sense that some of the very key basic points are being overlooked. And we'll get into questions, what about this and what about that, and how does this work, how does that work, or there may be an exception or something that somebody says, well, that's not my experience. And I usually do find, though, that a lot of those things come up, again, in overlooking those fundamental points. The basics are very, very basic, and yet they're extremely profound, because to grasp the basic points of who you are, what your nature is, that's the one big thing I always stress. And then a little bit of discussion about the suffering and the questions and where all these doubts come from and what is at the root of those. If you can really get a handle on those, you are not going to have many questions or problems or issues that are really coming up and troubling very much.
Yeah.
So since we've covered a lot of that, those two fundamental points, we probably don't need to go back through that. I mean, unless you're interested to review some of those.
So I think that they really hit home pretty good, and I think the fundamental point that a lot of people miss is the one you always start with, which is just, can you deny the fact of your own being? And then to define what that being is and to realize that there is no definition for that.
Yeah, there's no definition in language, but, I mean, what the key, though, is to see what that is in direct experience. I mean,
yeah.
To recognize what's being pointed to within your own direct experience with a clear, solid knowing that is not theoretical. Oh, I understand what they're talking about. I see that for myself. I had a fellow come to a meeting a few weeks ago, and he had obviously been looking quite in depth into this stuff for quite a long time, and so we sat down and went through the basic points, and just about 10 minutes later, it really struck home. He said, oh, I get that. I really, really see what's being pointed to. And, you could tell it was just a direct kind of tuning into that and recognizing that principle of his identity in indirect experience. And once you see that, once you catch the perspective of that, it's an unshakable, very, very solid knowing that nobody can pull you out of even your mind, even the doubts and questions of your mind don't really disturb what you've recognized, because no matter what the question, no matter what the doubt is, at the end of the day, it's simply an arising within what we're talking about. Your own doubtless nature, which is present and aware, and it's here, and it's completely, absolutely evident. There's nobody that can deny their existence, or that sense of cognizing, that sense of awareness that is inherent in what they are, that's registering each and every thought right now. And that's the utter simplicity but incredible profundity of this, is that is what this is. Nothing more. Everything that we're going to discuss today, or in any of these talks that we have, or writings that that are coming out, it's really just pointing to that so that we can notice that.
That's beautiful. It's so stunningly simple that, it kind of gives one to, if one thinks about it, to wonder how it was ever missed.
Yeah, the moment this is seen, and we all come to see this when it's pointed out, and I'd like to say, and it was based on my experience, that seeing this involves a couple of things. One is a very, very clear pointing by somebody who can speak with some experience. It's not going to be intellectual. It's not going to be theoretical. It's going to be a direct pointing with no complication to it, no subtle concepts, no mistaken views of it, just a very clear pointing. And then coupled with our own interest to look at that and to look directly without getting into a bunch of conceptualizing. And, when those two things come together, it's almost impossible not to see what we're talking about. And it's something, it takes no time. It's not a process. It's not the end point of something that anyone does, as an entity, as a seemingly separate person, but it's a complete, full stop, dropping of the concept, and a simple recognition of something that, like you say, is so obvious, is so present, that the moment that we understand what's being pointed to, the question is, how did I ever miss this?
Yeah.
Especially because it's the most obvious fact of your experience, which is, basically your own presence. It's been there since day one, constantly. It's the only constant, it's the only thing that has never wavered for so much as a thought instant in any of the experiences that you've ever had, because it's that which is doing the experiencing itself. It's funny how we have looked away from this, kind of looking everywhere else, into the appearance of things, but not noticing this. And somewhere along the line, this is going to get pointed out very, very clearly, and with such simplicity and such directness, and stripped, kind of bare down to the essence, that you're not going to miss it.
Yeah, I like that phrase, stripped bare. It's this bare, naked knowing.
Yeah, it has to be simple. What I found in a lot of these traditions, and with a lot of the teachers and things that resonated with me as I was really exploring this, is that it was the more simple, the more direct, the more immediate the communication was on this, the more powerful it was. And if we stick with what is immediate and already present, we're not going to be ever talking about things like when you see this tomorrow, when you do this and that, when you purify, when you do all the right things, and then someday you'll be kind of qualified to see this. All that kind of style of talking is the antithesis of this. It's turning this into something that, if you look at the language and all of those kinds of styles of talking, it's always pushing this out into the future. And those kinds of teachings and those kinds of communications, what I have found is that the people following those or listening to those do not see this, because the pointers are obscuring what we're talking about. It has to be now, it has to be here, it has to be clear, it has to be immediate and available. And there are direct teachings, direct pointers that are consistent with that.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that you'll find that you kind of gravitate toward those, because they're more potent, they're more direct, they're more practical. They're more something that I can say, I can see that now. It's something that I can recognize for myself.
Yeah.
And it's simple, and yet, think about it, how rare that often is to hear it presented that way. Yeah,
it's extremely rare. I mean, as you know, I went through 3 decades of what I might now call the conventional spiritual seeking. Mm-hmm. And it was always about a couple of things. One, it was always about becoming. It was never about being. It was about becoming being. And the assumption that, well, it'll happen someday if you just keep doing this, that, or the other thing, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing was that everything had this element that I'll call in order to. I do this in order to make some attainment. For who? Of course, for me. And so that assumption of me and the assumption of someday and becoming was never really called into question in those environments. So that's why meeting you was such a startling revelation of, oh, wait a minute, could it really be that simple?
Yeah, and that's what happened with me with Sailor Bob Adamson, and from what I understand, that's what happened with him. When he met his teacher, and the funny thing is, I mean, for many years, I had actually been involved in what I thought was non-duality, because it was the studying of the teachings of various sages and things out of a non-duality tradition, but what I didn't realize is that even the pursuit of non-duality at that stage was still being done through the filter of those things that you were just talking about. It was, the attainment or the recognition of this, at the end of a process, or, hanging out with teachers where, for example, there was a subtle kind of unspoken message that the teacher had it. Like, he had realized it, and we had not.
Exactly.
And, the name of the game seemed to be, I'd like to kind of get that so I can be in that same state. And so there was encouragement to, do your practice and study the scriptures and attend as many meetings as you possibly could and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, in a way, that still is moving away from the essence of this. I mean, rarely would you hear, this is what you are already that, this freedom of your natural state is here already, you don't need me, you don't need anything because this is what you are. And, I mean, I don't recall ever, hearing it stated quite that directly. And so, even though I was involved in those kinds of teachings, I was still mostly getting hung up in this, as you say, this becoming. What do I need to do in order to achieve that? And I used to study those non-dual scriptures and things, and I would think, well, this is great, I'd like to get this. Can somebody please tell me what I need to do? And this is the kind of thing that, when I met Sailor Bob, which was the beauty of that, is that these concepts, almost as they were coming out of my mouth, he was able to completely tear them down immediately. He'd say things like, so what do you need to do to be present? And of course you realize, well, I don't need to do anything to be present. And then the pointer was, well, that presence is it. And that's what you are.
Yeah.
So a little concept like that, which literally would, kept me going for 10 or 15 years, in missing that. When this was pointed out in this style, the concept itself was seen through and exposed immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It brings you right back to the inescapable recognition of what you are, not tomorrow, but now. Again, everybody here, everybody listening, must be able to say they know that they are, that they recognize their presence. And the thing that just absolutely powerful thing that was shared is that what you're recognizing is what this is talking about. There is nobody outside of this recognition. There is nobody listening to this who is missing this recognition now. The only thing that we might be doing is overlooking that or downplaying that or thinking, gee, maybe it's something else. But every tradition has told us, you are that. Your nature is that absolute reality. That is what you are. And, what we find is they meant it.
Yeah.
They were literal with that. They were telling us exactly how it is. And, we might have been doing things like, oh, that sounds great. I hope someday I get there.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're back in the concepts again of the assumption that somehow you're not there, which is, the exact reverse of what you just heard. So what we want to do is we want to take this stand on this position of literally being that, and then look at these concepts and pointers and discard them instead of following them.
You said something very, very powerful I want to underscore, if that's okay. Sure. You said you take the stand that is what is real. And I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's what I heard you say, is that it has to do with the taking a stand is what I wanted to talk about. I remember something that Martin Luther is reported to have said, that here I stand, I can do no other. And that here I stand has a profound sense of freedom and power in it. Mm-hmm. That I stand nowhere or everywhere, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah, it's a matter of in a certain sort of a way. I mean, talking about where we put our identity.
Yeah.
See, everybody, until we've really looked into this and really heard the simplicity of this, the mind has been habituated to say things like, I'm not there, or somebody else has this, or I'm missing the understanding, or I don't have the understanding. I mean, all of these things, all of these concepts, and what we've tended to do is out of a kind of ignorance, taken our stand on those concepts, defining who I am, defining what reality is. And we can see what that's gotten us. It's gotten us kind of strung out in the doubts and all that stuff and feeling limited. Well, it's only because of where we're putting our identity. So the encouragement here is to take your stand on something else that's also present, which is your own being or your own presence, however you want to call that. And there's many pointers, and you can pick any one of them that works or that resonates. It could be consciousness, awareness, being, knowing that you are, all of these things, that which never changes, all of these types of pointers. But look at that, look to that in your experience, recognize that, and take your stand as that. Mm-hmm. And then you'll find that you kind of tap into something so very certain, so very clear and solid that it just undercuts all of these concepts. And this stuff starts to make more sense because you realize what you're standing on is what you are. This is when the game changes, because when you realize that what is being pointed to is what you are, then all of these other notions about, when do I get it and what do I do and who else has it and who doesn't have it, all these things become meaningless because you are already one with what is being pointed to. And, the very extraordinary, powerful statements that you hear suddenly make perfect sense. For example, you don't need to attain your very existence, or you're not practicing your existence, or there is no path to what you already are. All of these things, they're perfectly clear to all of us listening to this, because they don't make any sense, in terms of what I am already. I'm not practicing my presence. And this is it's like the golden key that unlocks the whole door to everything that this kind of spirituality is talking about. And another beautiful thing about this is you cannot lose that. Because how can you walk away from your existence? How can you be outside of what you are? And so a lot of the other issues that people bring up, like they glimpse something but it comes and goes, or they lose it, or they go in and out of being, all of these things, they don't apply to the truth of what you actually are. You're never going in and out of your existence. You're never gaining and losing that. And usually what you find is that when people are talking that way, they are still taking their stand on something that is an appearance, something that is in the content, or something that is changeable. They haven't really quite gotten down to the bedrock of what's really being pointed to, because the moment that you recognize what we're talking about, there cannot possibly be any going in and out of that. It's actually absolutely impossible, because you can't have any experience, good or bad or up or down, outside of what we're pointing to.
Beautiful.
And then, then you can, it's just, like I say, this, a fellow that came to the talk that I did, he came back this week, and I said, well, how are you doing? He said, perfectly clear. No problem. And it wasn't because it was some great attainment or something like that, but again, it's a recognizing of something that's not going to change from week to week. That's not going to be a variable type. Oh, today it's up, tomorrow it's down. I had it when I was at the meeting, and then I lost it when I went to work. All of these things, they don't apply.
All right.
And clearly, though, the key is you gotta see exactly what is being pointed to. That's the critical piece of this.
Absolutely.
And it's not hard. It's not difficult. In fact, it's almost like you can't avoid it if you're listening and really following along.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Let this sink in and follow along and see what you missed the first time you listened, and kind of really get your attention geared up. And one person wrote in, made a comment, and I'll just read it. Awareness is always on, and it cannot be objectified. A separate self can never be found upon investigation. All good so far, right? Mm-hmm. And then she says, the pointers are clear, but how do I stop thinking that something needs to happen in the future? I can't get rid of this idea. It's so damned persistent. Yes, I know who would get rid of it. So then, how does no one get rid of this notion that something needs to happen in the future? Ha ha. But seriously, how?
What will come up here, and you may have, your take on this, which I'd enjoy hearing as well, but the thing that I would typically point out is, first of all, noticing that the question or the doubt itself is an idea. It's a creation of thought. And see, what happens is, nobody ever moves out of their being. It's impossible. And, all that can ever really happen is a thought or, a perception or experience arises within this. I mean, that's all that ever happens. And, if you look at it from that level, you'll see that nothing changes with what we're pointing to. And that experience, whatever it may be, will come up, move through, and disappear naturally, leaving you, kind of right where you are already. And so, one of the best ways to tackle, the mind and these questions is do nothing. Because in that doing absolutely nothing, you'll find that the very question, it dissolves, because it has no substance really. So what hangs us up actually is the interest or the concern or the fixation on the thought, like, oh, this is something really important. I need to have this answer. I need to work this out. But it's actually not true, because that thought is not the inherent reality that we are. There's no lasting truth or happiness or security or permanence in whatever that thought may be. So kind of like the point is, whatever the thought is saying, whatever the content of that thought is really not as important, as we are thinking at that moment. Mm-hmm. If, we can see it kind of globally from that perspective. Just see the thought for what it is. It's an idea arising, and it's coming and it's going, and it's not what you are. And the answer is what you are. The answer is your being. That's the final answer to every question is, who am I? What is my nature? And we're already seeing that. If we take this pointer to heart and really recognize what's present, see, we have the answer in hand at that point. And this mind stuff that's coming and going, it does not enhance that. It doesn't make that any clearer or improve what you already are. And so you kind of almost get kind of a bland attitude to the mind. What about this? What about that? What about tomorrow? This is all mind stuff. It's all conceptualizing. And it's making it seem like somehow, that there's something better, in the imagination of thought, but there's nothing. It's just that's why that positive recognition about the nature of what you are is so powerful, because there really is nothing more substantial than what your nature is. And one of the antidotes, so to speak, to that is really settle in and make sure that you're looking and seeing and really recognizing what this nature is. It's not just, okay, I'm awareness, that's what it is, okay, now let me get on to other things like that. That's not what this is. You want to settle down and really, really see the nature of what this awareness, what your being is. And it's something like extraordinarily profound and deep and incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. And, these questions and doubts in the mind, these shadows that come and go, that make reference to these imaginary attainments, they just wither away, really, in the kind of like the blaze of the light of this, of who you are. And, there is nothing, when you really look deeply into this presence or this being, it's just going to, kind of blow your mind in terms of what that really is. We're talking about something that is unchanging. We're talking about something from which all the appearances are arising and into which they subside. We're talking about something that is timeless and unconditioned. We're talking about something that all of the Buddhas and sages and scriptures and traditions have been praising for, thousands of years, as the height of human experience. And that's what we're actually talking about. And so we really want to get into that, kind of sink into that and really take that in, because it's not just, oh, that's interesting, now let me get on to these problems. It's such a, it's kind of like Benkei, the Zen monk, used to say, why trade in the unborn mind for these ghosts of concepts in the mind, these thoughts? Why do we want to trade in this kind of pristine reality for these shadows that have no substance? And it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And when we start to look at it this way, then that's how we'll view these things. And why should I move away from this truth that I am to go chasing an insubstantial shadow in which there's no light at the end of that tunnel at all? But, we don't quite see that until, we look closely at this.
Well, I kind of discovered there is light at the end of that tunnel, but it turned out to be the train.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too, because, every thought or concept is promising something like, follow me and you'll be happy, follow me and you'll be at peace, follow me and you'll get it, all these things like that. But what you find is that you already are all those things.
Yeah, it's like man's search for more is really a trap, isn't it?
Yes, if the mind is promising happiness or peace or oneness or whatever, it kind of dawns on you that you don't get to those things by following the thought. You actually get to those things, so to speak, by recognizing, before the thought even comes up, those things are already what you already are.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, they've been shouting this from the rooftops for, centuries. That the source of happiness and peace and freedom and joy and oneness and all this stuff is the self, the true self, the true nature itself. So that's why you gotta stick with the basics. You gotta be really grounded in the fundamental points, because all the trouble really is arising from disregarding those points. And if you stick with the basics and you understand what's being pointed to, it takes the whole momentum out of this kind of search into the conceptual mind. Why should I follow the conceptual mind when it's just an appearance? It's just an empty shell that just has no substance. And the whole time, here we are standing as that light of being, consciousness, life, however we want to call that, in all of its immediacy. And that is it. That is you're already standing at, any place the mind could promise you that you would arrive. The truth of it is you're actually already there right now without the thought. So it's not a really good proposition to go, exchanging what you already have for something that is, just an illusion, really.
Sure.
So you have to really look directly at these fundamental things, and that's how these questions get resolved. They don't get resolved by following them and resolving them and pursuing them and figuring it out and all that stuff. It gets resolved by this firm stand of seeing your identity clearly, and then the questions dissolve. All of these issues that people talk about, like, getting enlightened and whatever it might be, all of these things, they just wither away into meaninglessness.
Absolutely.
Because, as we've talked about before, but, people don't realize that all of those things are just imaginary concepts. And even in the scriptures, even in the non-dual traditions, if you read it very closely, it's very clearly stated, for example, that the bondage and liberation are imagined. They are only in reference to the assumption that we were ever separate from that reality. And the interest and following these notions, like, when am I going to get the final understanding? It's laughable. It's absurd. Or like even something like, when the shift happens and I will be there. Even these things are ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of like we accept promises from someone who's a proven liar. We let the mind con us into thinking that there's such a thing as someday and some attainment that we can get for this fictional me, and we don't ever realize it's just tail chasing.
Yes, yeah, and the proof of that is that, and I'm sure, I've seen in my experience, and I see it all the time, and people that I talk with or acquaintances that I've had, and that it basically goes on and on and on and on, year after year after year, and it's like the answer's always over the next horizon. Like, people were talking about awakening, and that went on for a few years, and then people were complaining about it, like, well, I'm not satisfied. So then there was a new teaching that was like, well, you got to get liberated, and then they did that for a while. Then they said, well, people wwere complaining, that this liberation comes and goes, and then they made up a new teaching which says, well, you got to have the liberation which stays permanently, and it just kind of would go on and on and on and on, and every time there would be a new revision, a new release of product 1.0, 2.0, 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
People would get all excited again, and okay, that was the problem. Now we're on the right track, and eventually, and we've all done this. You'd start for example, switching teachers or whatever. Oh, this new one is it, or this new book, or this release, Oprah just endorsed a new book. Oh, that's it. But it's, you play that game, and then you start to realize that you're on a hamster wheel.
Absolutely.
And for a very, very simple reason, and that is you're looking away from where the truth of this really lies. It doesn't lie in an experience or a book or a technique or a teacher or something like that. It lies in the truth of what you are, which, is of course what the great, traditions have been saying all along.
It takes you right off the treadmill.
Yeah, the moment that you get the clue, you're out of the game, and you're not playing the game, and there are stories like that where people would go to certain teachers like Nisargadatta, and they would talk about what they're doing, and he's reported to have said things like, well, I don't play that game here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't play the spiritual game here. And, that could be kind of an abrupt, kind of an unexpected thing for someone.
Man after my own heart.
Yeah. But there comes a time along this where it kind of dawns that maybe we have been looking in the wrong direction. And maybe that there is a kind of a game being played where we are chasing our tail. And that's when this kind of pointing suddenly, it kind of emerges as being very, very relevant. Because what we're doing when we're talking about this is we're exposing the game. It's like the fallacy of the whole search. And, in a funny way, it's kind of interesting. All spirituality is really based on the fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality that we are does not need any spirituality because it is that reality. So, in a way, all of the teachings and all of the paths and all this kind of thing are actually still coming from the perspective of the assumed separation. And but that's always been taught as well. People, for example, they're into Buddhism or whatever, and they often overlook or they kind of discount what Buddha said about the raft which is carrying you across the stream itself must be relinquished.
Yeah.
Because if you hang on to that binds you as much as any other concept. But we get so attached and enamored with all of these practices and traditions and all that we can lose our way and start to think that tradition or the raft itself is the reality. But I guarantee you right now, Buddhism or Hinduism or Vedanta or Advaita or satsang, these are not what is real. Because, they're still just appearances. And, hopefully if they may be useful in pointing to what needs to be seen. And that's fine. But even at that point, we have to be willing to follow the pointer and realize the reality being pointed to. And then all of those pointers, we realize, okay, they serve a purpose. But the pointer itself is not what is being pointed to.
Of course, and then once something has served its purpose, there's no need to string it on beads around your neck.
Yeah. And in fact, there's no value in clinging on to like an expedient pointer, because what you do is you hold to that living reality. And also what you find, and what I've seen in talking with people that do understand this and have shared this, is that the pointing and the discussions, they change and they're spontaneous with the current situation, You can't just reproduce a discussion from, 10,000 years ago or something. People have different questions. They're coming from a different perspective. The issues that we face, the questions that we see, like in America, in the West now, they're going to be different. They're going to be they need to be addressed differently. And
in the context in which they appear.
Yeah, I've been talking about this. I met Sailor Bob in 2003, and just like I feel for anybody that really looks at this stuff, it's bound to be very, very clear and solid pretty quickly because of the simplicity of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been talking with people about this for a few years now, and I rarely hear any questions, for example, about traditional concepts like karma or rebirth or or this kind of thing, because it's not really part of the culture. It's not really part of what is coming up for people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, there's not this, there can't be this kind of sacredness or, fixation on the pointer, because that was, as they said in those traditions, that the pointing or the teaching, it was an expedient means, a kind of a temporary medicine. And that's why we can't talk in the same way that Nisargadatta did, or Buddha or something. We can't just mimic that. We want to get to the meaning. We want to get to the essence of what's being pointed to. And then out of that understanding will come our own spontaneous sharings and our own insights about how to look at this stuff.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Whoever said silence is golden had a point.
You can either say nothing about it, because what we're really pointing to within ourselves is not a concept, and there's no concept that can really capture that. Even the pointers are just temporary. People don't realize that sometimes when they hear these words like being or consciousness or awareness or oneness. I mean, those aren't really what you are. They're just somebody's pointer to encourage us to look for ourselves. And so in that sense, there's really nothing you can say about the truth, about who you are. Because the moment you open your mouth, right, it's a concept. And then, the mind will often grab a hold of that and say, well, what's the meaning of that concept? And like let's say that you describe the true nature as the sense of being, for example. Then the mind might say, well, yeah, but I thought it was consciousness. And then suddenly the mind is debating and you're back into the concepts again. So that you have to be very light with the concepts. No concept is it. However, on the other hand, here we are talking about this stuff, and you can almost kind of talk forever and never really cover it all either. So you can either kind of say nothing about it or say everything about it. But the main thing is really just seeing what's being pointed to.
And hearing really with the heart, not the mind.
Yeah, that's true. It's an interesting point. It's an important point, and that is that this is not understood through the mind. Whatever we can grasp intellectually or conceptually, by definition, cannot be this. Cannot be the essence of this. So if we find ourselves cogitating, intellectualizing, debating, struggling, hashing over pointers, comparing this, comparing that, my recommendation is time out. Take a step back and take another look. Because, the odds are in that situation that we're looking into the mind. And we're expecting the mind to provide an answer.
That reminds me of the old story of the guy looking for his keys. He had lost his keys, and he was scratching around in the dirt at night looking for his keys, and a neighbor came by. And, he was scratching around in the bushes under the streetlight trying to find his keys, and a neighbor said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, I lost my keys. I can't get in my house." And he said, "Well, I'll help you look." So the neighbor gets down on his knees, and they're both scratching around under the bushes and under the streetlight. And finally it dawns on the neighbor to ask the first man, "Well, about where did you lose them?" He says, "Oh, well, I lost them over by the door, but you see, there's no light over there."
It's like, where are we looking for reality? It's a make or break kind of question, If you're looking in the wrong direction, you're not going to find it. I mean, however sincere or diligent or knowledgeable, you might be.
Got to do a 180, don't you?
And that's why, I think what I found, it's interesting in looking at this, is there's kind of a sense that I've gotten, and that is that if you're very simple and very literal with this, and kind of, how would you say that? Just, not a lot of cogitation, not a lot of intellectualizing, then this stuff, it just cuts right through to the essence, and it's very immediate. Like, so, coming back to a direct experience here, is there anybody here, anybody listening, that is not present and aware? Cannot recognize the fact of their being and that aware nature that is functioning right now? And that's the kind of question that really highlights the immediacy of this. This is really not so much something for scholars or it's not a traditional type of thing. So for it's something for simple normal people that can pause the concept and just simply follow the pointer and recognize in their experience. And then what we find, we all find this together, is that there's a recognition. Oh, yes, I recognize that, and I've seen this over and over again. Is that is the way that this is embraced. I mean, that is the way that people understand. It's a very, very simple type of thing like that. It's that.
Yeah.
And then there might be a little confirmation. Yes, that. Now you know.
Just that. Nothing else.
And I hope it strikes home for folks who give it a listen.
Yeah, and it's potent and clear. And as far as I can tell, all it takes is to kind of drop into it. Just listen with an open heart.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you, John. I love you.
I love you too, Charlie.
And I know you love people deeply and profoundly, and your contribution is awesome and deeply appreciated.